topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the heart. Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the heart. Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the heart.
Hello and welcome to It's Your Voice, the show that hosts enriching conversations in diversity every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. My name is Bahia Yaksan. I'm a core alignment coach, an emotional wisdom training specialist, and a diversity educator. That means I support people in aligning their actions with their values and in using our emotions wisely. And if you're interested in looking at programs and examples of like classes I tailor design for different groups or offices, all kinds of profits and nonprofits and schools, you can find my programs on my website, which is knowwhatyouvantcoaching.wordpress.com. I am now leading or facilitating the third conversation in the 3-part series called Healing Davis. And today we have a guest from the local police department, for whom I am grateful. And I will, I'd like to bring Deputy Chief Todd Henry on right now. And I'd like to thank you for being here so much. It's like that. The situation we've been dealing with in Davis has been incredibly taxing on police officers and all first responders and city council. And so I appreciate you taking the time to come and help Davis heal.
Thank you for having me.
It's an honor. And before I chatter on, let me read the listeners and the viewers some information about your background. So Deputy Chief Todd Henry has been in law enforcement for over 26 years, and he was in the Sacramento County Sheriff Office for over 25 and left as a captain. He then went to the California Lottery as the Chief of Field Investigations for just over a year and has been with the Davis Police Department since March of 2023. I didn't realize it was so recent. That's amazing. While with the Sacramento Sheriff's Office, Todd was a Sacramento Regional Incident Management Team member for 5 years and is credentialed with the California Office of Emergency Services as an incident commander. And as part of this team, he responded to several large natural disasters throughout the state and has extensive experience in emergency management. Todd has been a board member of the Sacramento Continuum of Care Board and is a board member of the Placer County Mental Health, Alcohol, and Drug Advisory Board. While with the Sacramento Sheriff's Department, he was responsible for developing a homeless outreach team that worked collaboratively with the various organizations to help navigate members experiencing homelessness to services. Todd has also represented the Sheriff's Office in implementing one of the first mental health mobile crisis response teams in Sacramento County, pairing a mental health clinician with an officer. He has a strong background in community policing strategies and intelligence-led policing. Todd has a master's degree in criminal justice with a concentration in administrative leadership, a bachelor's degree in criminal justice management, and is a graduate of the FBI National Academy. He's been married for over 20 years to his wife, Lindsay, and has 2 children. So that is an incredible amount of experience.
It sounds so much better when you read it than when I think about it in my mind. So thank you for that.
And wow, that's really admirable, and really so many different sets of skills and just layers of experience.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I have the feeling. Do you, for the listeners and viewers who perhaps did not hear part 1 and part 2, I have the feeling you could explain the incidences that occurred that Healing Davis is responding to in a much more efficient way than I could contextualize it, if you don't mind me asking you to do that.
Yeah, no, of course.
Okay.
So on April 27th, obviously the police department got a call through our dispatch center notifying us of an individual who was later identified as David Breaux, and he appeared unresponsive. Officers responded and quickly, realized that he had been the victim of an assault. And so obviously that initiates a homicide investigation for us, which is, one homicide investigation is very complex, especially for a city like Davis. We just don't experience it that often. And so at that time, there was no identified suspects. We had no witness information. So we began the process of trying to work through the investigation. And then 2 days later, on April 29th, Karim Abou Najm was assaulted and killed at Sycamore Park. And so the nature of the assault, the violence of the assault, and the time frame, obviously at that point we couldn't definitively say they were connected, but there was a lot of indications that led us to believe that it is possibly these two incidents are connected. And so now we had 2 homicides in a very short period of time, very violent assaults. During that second incident, we did have a couple witnesses that had a brief view of a potential suspect, which was helpful, but it wasn't to the point where we were going to be able to narrow it down that evening. So again, we've just got these 2 complex investigations paralleling each other and trying to do everything we possibly can to identify a potential suspect in those cases. And then on May 1st, there was the attack on Kimberly Guillory, and the description was very similar in nature to the second assault. And we definitely, although we didn't have the definitive link between them, we definitely had the feeling that these were all connected for various obvious reasons. And, each one of these just increases the intensity for the police department, because the concern is public safety. And when you have incidents like this where a suspect is not, identified, and their pattern is very random and very violent, it is just a huge concern to how to try and resolve and bring some kind of closure to these, and obviously just the concern for the public. And so we had these 3 incidents in real close succession, obviously appear to be connected, and we still didn't have a suspect. And so that's kind of where we started to progress into the investigation after that 3rd incident.
Thank you so much for spelling that out for listeners and viewers. And from a outside perspective, it was miraculous to me that the police department captured this person at all, much less than with so few leads. It was just part of, I think, why the town was so terrified, because, as you said, the random nature and the violence, the degree of violence, was utterly terrifying. And the little bits of information that we're sharing, that it was going to be very difficult to resolve and to identify. And let me just express publicly how grateful I and everyone else was. And it just felt incredibly. It might not have felt like this from your end, but it felt amazingly expedient. Though every single day in between was absolutely terrifying, and it felt like the whole city was holding its breath.
Yeah, no, it's, and being relatively new to Davis, right? And just, the opportunity that I was presented to kind of understand the dynamic of the city and just how shocking this was to the city for obvious reasons. And Davis, for a lot of reasons, is very lucky because it is a very safe community the vast majority of time. And I think when you have incidents like this that are so unpredictable and so violent, it's a shock. It's a shock for the community, but it's also a shock for the police department. Because yes, we are prepared for that, and yes, homicides do occasionally occur in Davis, but not like this, and not to this degree. And so it was a lot to, one, absorb that dynamic of, wow, this is really happening, and two, at the same time, realize that, like, hey, we have a job to do, and we really have to be focused on that. So that balance is always tough for the community and the police department.
And I want to make sure we have plenty of time to talk about the traumatic impact on the police officers and first responders. And as you and I outlined beforehand, I think I would first like everyone to know how the response, the coordinated response, and then we can maybe sort of talk about how the work that Davis did from post the George Floyd murder and huge awakening. There was just a big stirring of organizing in Davis to establish how we can make our city safer, and establishment of like the Police Accountability Commission, etc. But so before we get there, I think this is a great time for you to let people know how hard y'all worked, and how you and others have emphasized how important the collaboration between different agencies in the city help make this miracle happen.
Yeah, no, for sure, and thank you for that. Without a doubt, I couldn't be prouder of the Davis Police Department and just their approach to this. Davis police officers, they're here for a reason. And, in this day and age, police departments across the nation they have very high vacancy rates. It's very hard to recruit people into the field for a variety of reasons. And, Davis is doing pretty good, and especially just for our region. And the officers that come here have a connection to Davis, and they love Davis, and they have a connection and a commitment, right, to the safety of this community at a level that's just impressive to watch. And so when there's incidents like this, when our community members are victimized, that is a very personal assault for them as well. And they take that very seriously, and they're also, just like everybody in this community, they're emotionally affected by it. But they really, just dug in and did some amazing work. And it was difficult work. There was many days where several officers were working upwards of 20 hours a day, just trying to follow all these leads, to track down potential witnesses, scouring the city for evidence, making sure that we were following up on anything that came our way. I mean, I would walk through the investigative area, and there was officers that were sleeping under their desks so they didn't have to drive home. So they were ready. And it was just an amazing lift for an organization like this, because we are very capable as a police department. But we're also a small police department, and we're in a city where this isn't a common occurrence for us. And so that adds an extra burden to it. But they just were completely all in. And it was just amazing to see the level of commitment that they have to this community to bring resolution to it. And I have no other words other than say it's inspiring. that people care that deeply and they take it that personally. And so it was impressive to see, but they did amazing work. And obviously, the first incident occurred, and we said, okay, well, we've got a homicide and we have to work to solve this. And then the second one happened, and it was like, okay. And then when the third assault happened, we realized, like, okay, we really need to kind of, and we had obviously prior to that started to bring in additional resources to kind of support us in the mission of completing the investigation. But then we really opened the door and we're like, we need some support because there's just so many tasks to complete, and our officers were working around the clock. And, that in itself was also just an amazing experience because law enforcement in our region, it is really like one mission, and they all just jumped in and were willing to help and brought all types of resources. I mean, there's so many agencies that provided extra patrols, right? Brought in people on overtime to support with investigations, brought in resources to help us process evidence, to help us process tips and leads. It was just amazing to kind of see the law enforcement community just gather together to be able to help us work through this investigation, and it was impressive. And I really think that kind of feeds into too that I'm always a big proponent that law enforcement is a part of the community, and community should be a part of their police department. And I think this event really highlighted the relationship that we have. And I can go into that because I think it's another story into itself as to what that looked like and the support that we got from the community. But ultimately, the community was a part of the apprehension of this individual. And that trust and collaboration, right, as a police department and their community, was impressive.
Wow. Yes. Well said. Again, from my little perspective, you could see it along the way, like, or hear about it. Like, it just really did feel like a partnership. Like the residents were anyone who was capable of actively, I'll just say, getting involved, did it. Like, it was just, thank you for describing that, because I think often that is overlooked, how much community can help law enforcement through leads. And that's wonderful to acknowledge them too. But I think also it would be really great for you to say, because you said it's a whole story, that's a really important story for law enforcement and communities everywhere. If you do, I would love to hear more, if you can share more about how important that it is that law enforcement is a part of the community and that relationship and the relationship building. I think that would be a great point to underscore.
Yeah, no, and I think, whenever there's a tragedy, I'm always trying to find the silver lining in the story, right? Like, what came out of this that we can look at and, use as like a support to reaffirm, what we did great as a community. And there was just so many things that I saw and that I was witness to that were just really amazing and heartfelt. And, there was a memorial for David Breaux, and I attended that, and I did not know David. But going to that event and seeing just how big it was and how many people from the community came out to respect him and acknowledge his life and his contribution to this community was really impressive. And it really gave me insight to what Davis is about as a community, and it is very, very close knit. It's very unique in how supportive they are of the community as a whole, right? As us as a group, as one group. And that translated really into their support for the police department, because there's no question that there was a lot of community support just from the very beginning of this. And, you know, I worked in Sacramento County for a long time, and we had a lot of homicides. And by no way is this disparaging to Sacramento County in any way. But I never saw like a level of support that I did experience here. And that's just my personal experience. But it was unique. I mean, people were coming by the police department pretty much on a daily basis, bringing us food, writing letters of support, just, you know, thanking us. And that was so meaningful to the officers, because a lot of times, right, they do the job and they don't always get that public acknowledgement for what they do on a daily basis. And, you know, I think all the officers recognize that the community is hurt, and the community is trying to deal with this event and how impactful it was, but they still were there for us. And that really touched me. That was just very impactful for me, because it definitely reaffirmed, like, hey, we're in this together and we're going to solve this together. And it was just impressive to see. And that's not common in all cities or jurisdictions. And that we have that should be recognized and thought of as unique and special and something to be grateful for. Because at no point during the investigation did I feel that the community lost faith, or, you know, didn't feel that we were doing everything in our power to bring resolution to this case. It was completely the opposite. And, you know, cops are people too, and they're also reeling from the effects of this. And just as our community needs support, the police department needs support. And Davis absolutely stepped up and did an amazing job. And it was really awesome to see.
Well, that's really nice to hear. And I know that the city council, the part one, Healing Davis part one, the mayor was on, Will Arnold, and so was a very powerful community leader, Sandy Holman, who's been an amazing educator and facilitator around inclusion and belonging. And they did a beautiful job moving people through like grief and grieving. And they also shared with me, and you can add much more to this, about the coordination. I remember Mayor Arnold said all the words that start with CO, like coordination, communication, collaboration. And one piece of information he shared, which was actually in response to a question a UCD student asked me ahead of time. She said, please ask the mayor what the city was able to do for people who were and are living on the street. A lot of concern was for other people who did not have a house to go into and hide and feel safe and locked up. And the response was beyond what I even expected a city to be able to do through the social services and housing department, which I think grew out of all that community building between 20 and 22, 23. So can you share any more about how that, I mean, every person who lived who is on the street was offered a place to live during this time, during this terrifying time. And can you add more to that, or other ways the city or other commissions were helping support this effort?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And this was the first, I guess, crisis event I had experienced with the city of Davis. And it was great to see really how the city does take a team approach, and everybody just jumps in, right? Especially in crisis, to figure out what needs to be done and how do we do it, and how do we collaborate and communicate and make sure that we're all on the same page and we're thinking of all the aspects, because with an event that affects the community, you do need that approach. I mean, the police department is not going to be the only solution to that, right? There's so many other parts that play a critical role. And Dana Bailey, who is the director of the Housing and Social Services Department, which is a relatively new department, did an amazing job, because we were all thinking the same thing. It wasn't that we had information that this suspect was targeting homeless individuals, but it could have been that there was a correlation because they were so vulnerable. And so that is a huge concern. And obviously, the police department had a team that was going out in conjunction with, homeless outreach teams to make sure that we were contacting people that were, in camps and letting them know that, hey, here's our concerns. Be aware, here's how you get a hold of us. We obviously increased the number of patrols in those areas to make sure there was just officers present. And Dana did an amazing job of getting an emergency shelter up and running, which it sounds like an easy task, but I can tell you that is not an easy task, especially from starting one that is not open to getting it going and having, the space to be able to offer that for people experiencing homelessness and getting them into some type of shelter. But I think that you're right. That is an example of how the city collaboratively looked at this situation and started finding innovative ways, not easy solutions, complex solutions, but it is that coordination between, all the city departments, the commissions, even nonprofit groups. But, seeing, I don't know if you watched, but there was that city council meeting with, the chief and Dana Bailey sitting there together, coming up with solutions. And I think, that was kind of the intent of that, right? Is how do we look at these complex problems and make sure we're bringing in the right resources at the right time, have the right ability to be able to solve these problems. And we got to see it unfold. And I feel very proud of, how we as a community and we as city government really just pulled together and made some things come together that were really beneficial, I think.
Thank you for painting that picture. And it makes me want to give a shout out to Dylan Horton, who is a member of the Police Accountability Commission, who I met at one of the rallies after, in the wake of the George Floyd tragedy. And it just, to me, sort of is a powerful example. And he's a very young man who takes, who just really took up leadership of helping people think clearly about what kind of constructive solutions can we have to build relationships between citizens and police officers. And I saw him all over town, for days and weeks and months, explaining to people who were sort of caught up on the phrase defund the police, him sort of like translating it as a chant that was created to get attention, which it did, but not literally. We do not literally, we need the police, we respect the police, we want the police. And anyway, he did a lot of work that helped increase understanding for a lot of people, which I think led to a lot of good, sort of increasing the community relationship with the police officers. And that's just one of the people to shout out. And thank you for mentioning Dana Bailey's name. Definitely deserved a shout out too.
For sure.
And before we turn to what kind of support police officers are hopefully getting, I just want to know again, because I think this is really important modeling for other cities and other departments and other places. Can you just name whatever you can name about the number of departments that became involved, like the larger law enforcement community that were asked to come and who actually could come and actually participated in amping up, patrolling or viewing evidence or whatever? Can you just sort of give us a picture of how many different law enforcement entities were involved and where they were from.
Yes, no, absolutely. And I'm going to give it my best. I know I'm probably going to leave somebody off, and I apologize in advance for that, because really everybody that we reached out to just came and gave what they could. Obviously, our local neighboring jurisdictions like the Yolo County Sheriff's Department, the West Sacramento Police Department, the Woodland Police Department, Winters Police Department, Sacramento County Sheriff's Office, the Sacramento Police Department, the Department of Justice, the FBI. There was really just a litany. I mean, in as far away as Placer County, Rockland Police Department sent officers out here. And people may not know this, but those agencies are incurring all those costs, right? And so there's a thing in California called mutual aid, which is kind of how smaller agencies and sometimes even bigger agencies deal with incidents that exceed their capability, right? I mean, staffing levels are really kind of designed, to address the normal day-to-day operations of a police department. But when you have events of this size and scale, it can easily require additional resources that you just don't have. And so, fire departments utilize that obviously for wildland fires, and police departments utilize it too. And, it is just a general mutual aid request saying, hey, we need support. And they make it work. And that means they either have less officers working or they're calling in people on overtime. But they don't even ask, they just send. And I think if people were walking around downtown Davis during this incident, they probably saw police cars from around the region. And those officers were here to support this community and to work to keep this community safe. And that was only part of the picture, because we also had a lot of investigative teams from those agencies coming as well. And there was times where we had in excess of 40 people inside the building. And we're not that big of a building, so it was tight, but people show up and they're like, hey, we're here to support you. What do you need? Which was just amazing. So the response was obviously just very impressive. And, obviously if West Sacramento or Woodland called us, we would do the same for them if they were in similar circumstances. But it's that kind of almost statewide partnership that really helps agencies, whether they're a fire agency or a law enforcement agency, work through these big problems. And our region just absolutely stepped up to support us, and it was very impressive.
That is very impressive. It's phenomenal. And it's true that there were people commenting on how many different patrol cars were out there, and clearly they were from neighboring communities and helping support the city. And let's talk about, because the last couple shows were like Healing Davis Part 2 was with a therapist and who was getting many calls. So many people were triggered and terrified. And so of course her load and her workload, she actually called me to say, let's get this on the air. And a psychologist who she introduced me to is amazing man. He and his wife have spent years and years in Davis, again, like leading people and helping people create more inclusion and belonging. And we're talking about how it ended up being like a brainstorm of how we can find resources and ways to help people connect, and how much isolation is just detrimental to individuals, which can lead to horrific acts of crime. And they were also asking questions about how do we now help the community feel like, what would you say at this stage? What's your perception of how Davis feels at this point in time, and what are next steps and lessons and
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think what it's not going to be easy, right? And it's going to be a different path for everyone. And everyone is affected at different levels, and that's okay. I think when I look at the community as a whole, what really struck me during the incident, and which I was talking about earlier, was this sense of community and connection, and that was strong. And it wasn't like an event that occurred and, oh, I didn't know the victim. This wasn't directly affecting me. It was, this has affected my community, which in turn has affected me. And that doesn't always happen in every community. And that people were so closely tied to each other emotionally as a community. Um, and their response to that, right? Whether it was at the memorial or being present or being engaged or checking in on each other or just being available for each other in their support of us, the police department, the that tells me the foundation is there, right? And I think that's the most important part because this wasn't something that Davis just did because there was a critical incident. This was something that was a part of the ethos of Davis and what makes Davis unique and why people are drawn to Davis, right? I don't think you accidentally end up in Davis. You come to Davis because there's something there that is drawn you to it. And because we have that close network, right, that close community bond, when we hit crisis, right, it becomes even probably stronger, but the foundation is there. And so, the quote unquote crisis has ended, but we still have a long road to recovery, I think, as a community, because there is a sense of loss, no question about it. And that sense of loss can really vary depending on who it is. But I think that we have that foundation of connection and love for each other and community um, puts us in a position where we're going to be more resilient as a community, hopefully. And that maybe it will help with a lot of pieces of that recovery. And that's not something you can just really build on the fly. That takes time and it takes a unique approach as a community. And so that gives me a lot of hope that not that this is going to be better tomorrow, but that we have that foundation that's going to help facilitate us getting better in the future.
Thank you. And what do you think of that? Well, first of all, I used to be in crisis work, and our staff had to have supervision for secondary post-traumatic stress disorder because we were helping families who were fleeing from danger from inside of their homes, which was always traumatic. And then we would debrief only once a week at a staff meeting, and it was really, really, really clear that we were carrying, that we were taking on whatever you want to call it, secondary PTSD or vicarious post-traumatic stress. And those of us who took advantage of the supervision, it wasn't mandated, it was an option. And it was very clear who could continue functioning at our best and healthiest, just match with who was getting supervision and who was able to debrief, have time, someone witnessing how it was impacting us, what we were experiencing. And I wish that for all first responders. And do you guys have something like that in place? And if not, what is in place and what can help the first responders because you have to get back up and go back out, and it's really hard to do when you're carrying a load that doesn't get unloaded. So what are some things that are in place for you all, and what are some things that you, from all your vast experience of 26 years, feel like could be commonplace that isn't here yet to support you all?
Yeah, and I I think law enforcement has made amazing strides in this area, especially over the last 20, 15 years. You know, mental health was a topic that really wasn't discussed, especially when I was kind of getting into the field. There wasn't a lot of conversation of the impact of the trauma that you're exposed to almost on a daily basis. And, you know, trauma can accumulate over time. And if you're not taking a proactive approach to try and manage some of that exposure, it can have really dramatic impacts on people. And I think, you know, just the socialization of, hey, there's going to be trauma in this field and it's going to have an impact on you. And here are the ways that we can kind of, as a industry, but as just individuals, work to manage that better has just improved a lot. And you know, there's a lot of people that leave this field because of trauma that they've experienced, and that they've reached a point where they can't do it any longer. And so obviously, you know, as a police manager, I love our officers and I want to make sure they're healthy. And I also want them, when they leave this job, to be able to continue to have a healthy and happy life. And to not be weighed down by everything that they experienced during, you know, a 25-year career. And so it takes a lot of thought and process. And, you know, those officers that responded to these incidents, and officers respond to, you know, a lot of critical incidents or traumatic incidents just in the normal course of their job. But, you know, take these, you know, these examples, these crime scenes were very vicious, very, very graphic scenes, and, you know, very difficult for the officers they're there for sometimes hours processing a scene to ensure that all the evidence is collected, and they're viewing that and taking that all in. And then we're asking them like, hey, go home and get 3 hours of sleep and then come back so that we can continue with the work. That's a heavy load on them, and they do it willingly, and they are passionate about what they're doing. But I'm also watching them going, okay, how long can we sustain this? And what are we doing to make sure that they're also healthy? Because I need them to be in a space to be able to be effective at their job. And just out of them being people, how do I support them? And so that's something we give a lot of thought to. We do a lot of critical stress debriefs, right? We have a lot of access to therapists. In fact, we have an app on our phones that they can direct link to a therapist. We talk a lot about what we've experienced and how we move forward on it. We have a lot of private conversations about where people are and how we can better support them and what support they actually need. But really, it's just trying to take the stigma around, hey, you're a person and you're not a robot. You're a human being and you're exposed to a lot of trauma, and it's okay to take that approach that sometimes we all need to acknowledge that and be preemptive with that and make sure that we're addressing mental health needs. And, you know, I can tell you, and I've already kind of alluded to this, but one of the other big components was the community outpouring of support, because there's a lot of times, you know, officers are exposed to traumatic events and nobody is aware of it other than us, right? They're going out to a domestic violence call, or, you know, calls involving children, or a traffic collision, or whatever the case may be, and they're absorbing that, right? And sometimes, you know, I think, you know, there's a feeling of like, well, does anybody know what we're actually doing out here on a daily basis? But during this event, like, everybody came out and they totally supported us in so many ways. And it was amazing to see, because it really reaffirmed for these officers, like, hey, this community does care about us. And they know that we're doing a really hard job, and they're super supportive of it. And so when I think of like mental health, what an amazing like opportunity for the community to step up and support them in a difficult time. And they absolutely did that. And I think that that in itself made a huge difference for a lot of people that, oh, this is meaningful to the community and they are here to support us. It was just impressive to see. And I think, that had a very lasting and will have a lasting impact on a lot of officers. So that was awesome.
Wonderful. I'm so glad to hear that. And I sounds like you have set up, or the department has set up several different ways of support for mental health support for police officers. And that it's wonderful to hear the like specific concrete things like the app on the phone. That's really important. If they don't have to go through, you think there's a direct app on the phone you can ask for, and to hear their supervisor, or I think you said manager, of say that you love them. That's so nice to hear the word love, and to that's the biggest support people can get, like thinking about their state of mind and their well-being, not just in the course of duty, but you're thinking about how they're going to live and thrive post this intense form of crisis work, constant daily crisis work, in my opinion. So I'm very happy to hear those examples. And I see we have just like 4 minutes left. And so I want to just make sure I give you an opportunity to make your closing remark. And I just barely need a minute to do my wrap up at the end.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And again, super appreciative that you had me on here. And, I've watched the series of these podcasts, and I think this is great because I think it highlights that this was really a community response at all levels. And I think that's somewhat unique. Not all communities are always able to do that. And so that we, as Davis, we really approached this as a whole community response. And so many people contributed to this process. I look at that and I go, wow, that's an amazing reflection on who we are as a community. And as hard as this is, and as difficult as this is, and how long the recovery is probably going to be for a lot of us, I do take away from it that I feel like it showed our resolve as a community and brought us together in even newer ways. And so if I was to take a positive out of this, like that is that in some ways it's made us a stronger community or a tighter community. And that in itself is pretty amazing.
Thank you. Yes, I'm having this this full circle thought again, that I didn't articulate it as fully as I wanted to previously, but I'm just kind of flashing back to when the city reacted to not, responded positively to Black Lives Matter movements, and how that motivated a lot of people to come out. And just when I'm trying to connect, like I'm seeing a connection between like grassroots voicing concern to actually causing positive systemic changes. And I feel like I've been able to witness that in the last few years here, and it didn't all happen in the last few years. Of course, the city had a lot of coordination and collaboration, and we have the university and a lot of things already going well. But I feel like that really augmented the communication between law enforcement and citizens and the relationship building. And I'm really happy that the law enforcement is feeling support and the community is feeling so appreciative. And I'm thankful to everyone for, as you said, so many people involved with this. And it's really nice to focus on the positive and look at the outcomes that can perhaps also be influenced for other people, other departments, other cities as well. So thank you so much. I Really grateful for this time. And I want to also thank our sound engineer, Rebel, our producer, Dean Piper, and the listeners and viewers. And thank you for watching the series. It's nice to know that you yourself found the 2 previous parts of Healing Davis helpful. And I thank you again to the viewers and listeners, and be sure to tune in next Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time to It's Your Voice on Talk 4 TV or W4CY.com. And may we all have enriching conversations in diversity this week and all the healing that we need. May it continue.
Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the heart. Inarticulate speech, inarticulate